All right, we're back. We have Geronimo Bejarano. Sam's here as well. Geronimo, thanks for coming on. Could you provide a little intro on yourself and then we can dive more into your actual background?
My name is Geronimo Bejarano. I am currently a incoming PhD student at Brown in the Health Services Research Department, focusing on health economics there.
Yeah, so I was initially introduced to you when we were both first year students in grad school through Zach Gabor. I think you were trying to do a research project with some people out in Australia, and I provided no help. But then we became friends, and I realized how much more information and research you read than I did. And let's start back there. So you've got a very interesting journey going through the education system, and that initially, from a graduate perspective, started in Cairo school. Can you touch on the initial interest in going to a DC program and then how that evolved and ended up having you leave that program?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess it starts with undergrad. So I played soccer in high school. I was good enough that I was getting D1 offers, but I did the whole like the only thing that I've ever done since 4 years old is play soccer, travel, Olympic development program, school, like middle school and high school. And I was a senior year of high school and I was like, this sucks. Like I've never gotten to enjoy anything. So like that typical, you focus on one thing and you burn out. I'm the picture of that. And so, 17, 18-year-old me was like, I don't want to play anymore. I don't care about, like whatever, getting a college, my college paid for, blah, 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 all of this stuff, bad decisions, in hindsight. But anyway, so I quit playing soccer after my senior year of high school. And so I went to UCF, University of Central Florida, and like the typical jock thing, I did my undergrad in exercise science, still not really knowing what I wanted to do and not knowing enough about any particular profession. Towards the end of that undergrad degree, I did attend like the Undergraduate Physical Therapy Association or whatever it was called there, but I wasn't ready to commit to a doctoral program at 22 years old at that time. And so I graduated, and there's not a whole lot you can do in America with an exercise science bachelor's degree. So I started searching around, and I got this gig where I was technically a chiropractic assistant, similar to a PTA, but I know that they have technically a licensing, but very similar. They were very much like uh, your typical run of the mill $3,000 up front, 32 visits. Here's your x-ray. Everything is wrong with you. I didn't know anything at the time. Like I was like, oh, that makes sense. And my job was basically during that time, what you got an adjustment every single time that you came in, and you got uh, stim, cold or hot, like the K laser things and the traction machines. And then after the first month, you were good enough to start doing exercises, but there was no plan for the exercises, right? Like this was all just, I'll call it a scam because it was. It was all a scam to like make the people feel like they got their money's worth for those $3,000 that they had to pay up front. Um, and so my job was to give the stim, the laser, and the decompression. And then once they got to like that second or third month, I got to choose the exercises. And that guy had no idea about exercise at all. So I was like, no mentorship, whatever. And I was like, all I had was my undergrad background. The good thing is that, like, I guess like the competitive nature was still there. So like I just started trying to do my own research. And that's, I just like, I call it luck because like I could have gone completely different for me, but for whatever reason, I found Greg Lehman, and fell down all of that rabbit hole of all of those people, including Sam and at the time Jake Harden and all of that stuff. So like I got steered in what I consider still the right direction. And that's when I really realized, oh, everything we're doing here is like pretty bad. But I couldn't do anything about it. And it got pretty bad. Like it got to the point where like I was sometimes seeing like five or six patients at the same time. Like I had two people on stim, two people on decompression, two people that I was doing exercises with, and I had kind of this rotation. I got really good at it. Like I got like it sucked for the patients, but like it was my job, and I got really good at like handling 5 or 6 patients at the same time. Like I could literally be like doing laser on somebody and then still telling the other patient over there like to do their bird dogs or whatever. And so it sucked again, like it sucked. But I think that helped me a lot to know what I didn't want to do. And so I still had some belief in that time of like I wanted to be a clinician. And so I didn't think that I still thought that I could do the Cairo thing without being like doing that. And I still think that you can. I have a lot of good friends that are Kairos that can are good clinicians and that I would send anybody to. But but yeah, so that's how I ended up at Cairo School. Basically, is after that I was like I'm going to apply, and yeah, that's how I ended up at Cairo School at Palmer in Florida.
So you were there about a year, I believe. What did that initial time there look like, and why did you eventually leave?
So I was there 2 years. So Palmer was quarters, and it's 13 quarters, so it's 3 years and a quarter. So 3 years and 3 months. I completed all of my. So for the first 2 years, you do all of your classwork, and then after that, it's like a year and a half of clinic. For like sometimes clinic, they have like clinics in the schools, and then after a while, you get to like go out and do like a clinic anywhere outside of the school. And so I had completed all of my classwork. So I'd done the hard part. And then COVID kind of hit, so everything went kind of online. So like that last quarter of classwork, I was online. So I went back home, and Palm Beach is where I'm from, and so I was living with my parents there because it was COVID, and I was just I was pretty depressed with like the way that my schooling like I felt like I hadn't learned anything, and I was I don't know $100,000 in student loan debt at the time. And I had no student loans from undergrad. So like this was strictly from Cairo School. I had all these student loans because Cairo School is super expensive, and they treat it. I mean, just like PT school, they treat it. You're in class from like 7:30 in the morning to like 3 o'clock or whatever. So it's like not a whole lot of time for you to have like outside of income. Like I don't think I knew almost anybody that like did anything except for maybe like bartend on a Friday night, which is obviously not enough to live off of. So like so yeah, so I was taking out student loans to go there, and I was taking out student loans to live, and so you start getting those emails of every like quarter of like how much student loans you have and how much you're taking out, and you're like, oh crap, I'm never going to pay this off. And I just was really involved in research from the beginning in terms of reading it, and I just had this idea of like I just didn't think that the students were that as patient centered as sometimes we like to think. And that's when I reached out to Josh Zadra, which some of you guys might know because he had that like uh, physical therapists don't follow guidelines paper with Mary O'Keefe and Chris Marr, that got a lot of hits or whatever. But anyways, he's under Chris Marr, which is like the biggest back pain researcher out in Australia. And I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I'm a Cairo student. I may want to get involved into research. I have this idea. What do you think? And he completely took me under his wing in terms of got on Zoom with me, thought through the ideas with me, and now I have some publications and stuff like that, and this was years ago, and every time I get a publication, I still email him or text him and say like, hey, this wouldn't have happened without you, even though you're not involved in this project. Like if you see those first emails of like what I thought was research, you would I still laugh at myself of like what I thought I was writing and all that stuff, and I learned so much from him. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go and do research after this. And there's a couple of ways to get your loans paid off if you do research. One of them is a loan repayment program through the NIH, which basically gives you $100,000. You apply to the grant, and the grant isn't like other grants, like research grants. You as long as you have a doctorate degree, which could include the PT degree, and you're doing research for 2 years, it's like a 50% approval acceptance rate or whatever, which is like really, really high for grants. So like it's a 50-50 chance of you on the first try to get it. And once you get it, it pays your student loan $50,000 a year for 2 years, and then you can renew again. So it's up to $200,000. So I was like, this will pay my grants. I'm just going to go and do research. I'm going to do a PhD after this. Josh and I got that patient centered thing, systematic review published. And I was like, I have publications. I know what this is going to take. I can go and do that. And so I was literally out of the didactic work when I said, I'm not doing this, screw it. And I called Palmer up and I said, hey, I want to drop out basically. And they're like, are you sure? You've done 9 quarters. And I was like, yeah. And that's how I ended up at UT.
Before we go on to the next path to going to UT, can you? I think this was this paper also with Zadro, the call for unsubstantiated claims, or is that independent?
No, that was independent. So Ben Cernick, that some of you guys might know, he's now doing hockey. I can say this. He officially has said no to his DC degree, so he's like let it go. Sorry, he's in Canada. Um, he's let it go. What is that called when you just don't you're not licensed anymore? Like you have your degree, but you can't use it. Whatever it's called. Didn't renew his yearly license or whatever. Either way, he just let it expire because he's like focusing on hockey now. He does like hockey research for whatever for school right now. But so Ben Cernick was also kind of one of those people that in our group with Aaron that we kind of just liked to yell on the internet. We were very angry on the internet all the time because of all the PT stuff and all of the people saying exercise bad or you can move this muscle, you can do this, whatever. All of like the hoopla, all this stuff. It was like Aaron, myself, and Ben. And Ben reached out and said, "Do you want to write a paper about how chiros are saying that they can cure COVID with manual therapy with spinal manipulation?" And so we did, and we published that paper, and we got a lot of hate mail from chiros, as you can imagine. It got pretty bad, and that was another reason that when I started getting the hate mail, I was like, this profession is just, it's too far gone, and I'm not going to be the one to save it. So that was another reason that I was like, I don't want to be involved with this anymore.
Was so you were there for 2 years. Was there any redeeming qualities of your time there and going into the program at UT Health? Do you think it prepared you in any way?
Yeah, I will say that PT, DC, MD schools, they really teach you how to learn, which I didn't know coming out of undergrad. Because, in that undergrad schedule, you take classes like Tuesday, Thursdays from like 9 to noon or whatever. And it's like 12 hours a week, basically, you're in class. And then you go to PT or DC school and you're in class 35, 40 hours a week, plus whatever you're studying outside of that and whether that's homework or that's like stuff that you like to learn outside of it or whatever, that really teaches you how to manage your time. And that is a skill that like maybe I wouldn't pay the $100,000 student loans that I still have, but that's a skill I'm really glad I have because then I got to this master's program at UT, and it goes back to that undergrad of like you take classes for like 3 hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and maybe you have like one like mid-afternoon Wednesday class. And then people really struggle when they go from like undergrad to masters of like only being able to do that. And I was like, this is the least amount of time I've spent in a class in years. So like, and I was still doing that and doing research in Cairo. And so like it became even easier for me to do outside research. And so a lot of people are like, how do you do so much? I was like, I used to suck in Cairo. So I used to sit down and talk about subluxations for 7 hours. I was paying them $9,000 every 3 months for my tuition and got to do research. So this is like cake. And without that experience of like going through Cairo school and how time consuming it is and still trying to manage your time, I don't know if I would be as good at time management as I am now.
Why did you end up choosing UT? I know you had a few options from the master's perspective, and then what did that actually look like during your time there?
So, yeah, so I was really interested in physical activity and kind of this like physical activity promotion thing. And they have a pretty good physical activity lab there. And more importantly, Bill Cole is there, who is like, well, I think like the assistant dean. But anyways, he's one of the big full-time professors at UT and their School of Public Health. He was on the CDC guidelines for the physical activity in like 2007 or whatever. So one of like the original ones that they put out for physical activity. So I really wanted to learn from him, and I reached out to him, and he was like super great. Jumped on the phone with me immediately, or on Zoom with me, all this stuff. So I was like, you know what? I would love to learn from you for a year and a half, do my master's, get my like master's like the epi and biostats classes out of the way, and then be able to apply to a PhD program. I could have continued there at UT and done my PhD there, but because of things that I learned while I was there, I did not. That we can talk about because I think it'll be helpful for people that are considering it. Uh, but yeah, no, I really enjoyed my time at UT.
And then the new transition, starting your PhD at Brown. Why did you choose this PhD? What is it going to look like over the next few years?
Yeah, so I was really interested in physical activity because I was just like probably anybody listened to it. I still think it's really important. I went in there thinking of how can we get clinicians to be better at giving physical activity advice, blah blah blah. The thing about Bill Cole is that Bill is not individual interventions person. Um, he um, he thinks that if we want to increase physical activity, the evidence suggests that we need to make more walkable neighborhoods, increase public transportation, these like social level factors. I went in there thinking individual interventions, and I do come from the Bill Cole tree. I don't think like that anymore. I think of like, if we really care about physical activity, you need to be part of like your little town or city call for like anytime they're thinking about adding sidewalks, adding trees, adding public transportation. Like, I think as a physician or a clinician, if what you care about is physical activity, you should be in those talks because you can help your community so much more by being an expert. You're an expert in physical activity, as a PT, and being in those talks, coming up from an expert and saying, "Hey, I think it's really good if we make these like more sidewalks, put trees along the sidewalks. If you're like in the south where it's super hot, like it immediately decreases the temperature of everything and makes it like uh, a better place for you to be able to walk and run and have these green spaces and all these different things." So that's kind of where I went with my work on physical activity. Um, and then I said, okay, well, I want to help clinicians in some way. What are the other things that clinicians used to complain about that really dictated other thing? And so health insurance is what everybody says, right? And so I got super in the weeds of health insurance, of like fee for service pay, value based payment models, capitated, bundled, all of this the sort of stuff. And I like kind of fell in love with it because like it's so much more complicated than you think when you're a clinician, in terms of, hey, why don't they pay me more? Okay, there's a finite amount of money. Yes, we can pay you more, but then we also have to take the money from somewhere. In theory, right? In theory, take the money from somewhere. So like the insurance company, and I'm not pro insurance company, but the insurance company does have a finite amount of money. So it is a trade off, right? You pay the PT more, and it is really important. You pay the primary care more, but that's less money that you can pay for that kid's cancer. Like it is what it is. It's true. That doesn't mean that I don't think that PT should be paid more, or there should not be a better way to pay for this stuff. But there is trade offs here. And what I really started to realize with that is like, okay, so like, how can I advocate for MSK and MSK clinicians and physicians in the right way, while still being knowledgeable of all of the trade offs that go around health insurance? So Brown is a top Medicare program. They've been doing Medicare for decades. And I fell in love with Medicare and Medicare Advantage and studying it. Well, I fell in love with studying Medicare Advantage. I hate Medicare Advantage. Fell in love with studying it, and trying to make it better because it's the federal program in the U.S. I think it most closely resonates with Canada's program and stuff like that in Europe, in terms of the closest that we get to kind of universal coverage at 65 years old. And so one little change of Medicare in a beneficial way can really help not only clinicians, but a lot of people. And so that's how I ended up at Brown.
The I know we had chatted about this, you and I personally, over the past few years. Those different payment models, you had mentioned a few um, briefly. Do you want to just provide some potential, like, future? I know some universities and health systems are going down different routes of different payment methods. Are there any that are enticing to you or that you think will gain traction?
Well, there's a lot that I think that are being shelled out, whether how much better they are than fee for service in terms of increasing quality of care or decreasing costs gets a little complicated. The one that I think a lot of clinicians uh, should be a little bit excited about because it gives them more autonomy are capitated models, which basically means that you get paid per member per month. So regardless of how much treatment you give that person, you get X amount of money for that person, right? So like let's call it $100 to per person that you get per month. And so if that person uses less than $100, you get to keep some of that money. If they use more than $100, you lose out on some of that money. But what happens there is on average, if you have a lot of people, on average, hopefully, some people don't use any health insurance at all. So this capitated model really helps kind of primary care and different things like that in order for them to be able to make a little more money. And that means that you can kind of do whatever you want, which I am leaning towards. I think that it's better than the fee for service model of like dictating what doctors and clinicians and physicians can do. I think that on average, doctors mean well and they will do the right things if there isn't a financial incentive not to, in my opinion. I think on average, I think that is true. Of course, we can all think of somebody that's crazy and thinks crazy things, but like I think on average, um, doctors mean well and they're well studied in their field, and I think they can do the right things as long as there's no financial incentive to do opposite. And I think this capitated model is helpful for that.
So, so there's a variety of ways we could go here, but throughout this process, you've participated and been a part of multiple other research projects and worked with researchers within the MSK world. Maybe we start with your participation in the new Cochrane systematic review on exercise treatments for chronic low back pain. I don't believe it's come out yet. I don't know how much you're able to discuss, but do you want to briefly chat about your level of participation in that review? Maybe some results or takeaways if you can.
Yeah, so Cochrane, 3 years ago, Jill Hayden published the big Cochrane exercise review. Um, and so that is a boatload of work. I don't know if you guys know this, but in 2005, they published a protocol. And in, what is 2 years ago, last year, 2022, they published the actual study because of how much work it is. And so the issue with it is that we have a lot of trials on exercise for chronic low back pain. As of right now, 450 is what we're going to include in this next trials. That takes a lot of time for you to search, extract, and every time you think you're done, it's been 3 months of extraction, and you go back and there's been another 100 trials published, and you're like, well, now our trial technically is not up to date. So you back and you do that and again. And so Jill had this really good idea of like, if you do this overarching review of exercise for chronic low back pain that is very vast, people can do sub reviews. Like you can focus on yoga or Tai Chi or exercise strictly for older adults, all within that chronic low back pain. And so what she did is she kind of pulled out like almost kind of like a request. If you have any idea that falls under exercise for chronic low back pain, I want to hear. And if it's hear from you, and if the idea is good enough, I want you to be part of my review. And basically, what it is like everybody that had these ideas, now we're all on the same team. So now instead of her and like her two research assistants doing this work, now there's like I think 8 or 9 reviews under her. So that's 8 or 9 leads, and then one other person from that sub review team on it. So that's 18 more people on this. So now we got to what would have taken her probably 4 or 5 years to update this Cochrane review. We're already done within a year of updating it. And so we just put out the protocol for this new one. that was just published in Cochrane, and then I don't. We will have submitted it by the end of the year. We're done with the extraction now. You just have to do the analysis and write it up. But the peer review process at Cochrane is extensive. So my sub review, I was angry once, guys. This was a couple of years ago. I was angry. Um, I everything that I learned about exercise, I for chronic low back pain, I said I don't understand why it needs to be a physical therapist or chiropractor giving this exercise for it to be beneficial for chronic low back pain, right? I from what I from what I'm reading, why can't it just be a personal trainer or a strength coach? I know that there's like licensing issues and understanding that, but just on a very empirical question, what if we compared uh, yoga teachers, personal, any unlicensed healthcare professional is what we called it, versus licensed healthcare professionals. And so that is what we called community based, and that is my review. That's my idea. Um, I think the protocol should be published coming up because it got accepted, so that should be coming up published. That's me, Ben, James, Josh Sadro, Mary O'Keefe, and Jill Hayden is that review for us, and I'm leading it. I haven't done the analysis yet, so I can't tell you. But I mean, my hypothesis is that it really doesn't matter in trials whether the person is a licensed healthcare professional or if the person is just a yoga instructor. That's my hypothesis. That's out there. That's my hypothesis on the protocol. We'll see if that is true or not based on the results. But that is my part of the review. And so, yeah, we'll see in about a year or so.
Wild. Well, congrats on being a part of that. That's a huge endeavor and a cool thing to be a part of. The switching gears, another research, not that you were part of it, but something that you've changed your mind on recently that you did want to chat about, the new JAMA piece on risk stratified care that came out for low back pain. Do you want to dive into one, what is risk stratified care, your initial thoughts, and where your maybe views have changed recently?
Yeah. The reason that I mentioned talk about this is I'm sure Sam and even you, Chris, get it a lot. Is that when you're putting out a lot of videos and a lot of YouTube videos and all that stuff, people are like, "You've been stuck in your ways. You've been putting out the same type of videos for so long." It's like, have you changed your mind on anything? And like, you have. Maybe not like so extreme as the first time you ever read a Greg Lehman post or whatever, but like you do start to switch with the evidence and stuff like that. So I always like to bring it up because I think that if you listen to me a couple of years ago, I sound and say the things like pretty similarly, but there are things that like I used to really, really think were going to be like the next panacea, and they're not. So like I talked about physical activity later, I used to be a very individual intervention person, and now I'm like, I think it's more of a social thing. Um, and so for this one, for stratified kids, it's the start back. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the start back. You screen with it. I thought this makes so much sense. It seems to be a pretty good at screening for low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Like anybody that's kept up with kind of that literature, that high risk usually has to do with like some sort of mental health issues, whether it's depression or anxiety, and that kind of translating to like some sort of fear avoidance, basically, with movement. And so what they initially found, so this came out of the Keele University in the UK like forever ago. What they initially found was, hey, we're pretty good at identifying these high risk patients that are more likely to become chronic. And when that happens, maybe we can give them an intervention that's a lot more CBT or anything else, whatever, like this, like very intensive intervention. And then for the people that are low risk, we know that they're probably going to get better pretty quickly, which, you know, is like 50% of the people or 60% of the people that even take a start back. So we don't really need to give them all that much. That was kind of the idea of stratified care, right? And so I was like, this makes so much sense. And I still do think it makes sense, but then we put it to trial. And now most recently was JAMA, I think is what you said. I'm pretty sure was the one that came out. I know it's Dan Ron is the lead author down at San Antonio. He's at a VA clinic, so I think I'm pretty sure it's San Antonio. But it just didn't work better than usual care, which they was just like not giving them the start back. Just like whatever it is that they do in the VA, PT or whatever, let's compare using this risk stratified, doing that. And that's not the first trial that's published that. There's now been 5 trials, and the only one that had even a little bit of a positive result in terms of pain, function, or cost was the Keele University first one. So they've tried to replicate it 3 or 4 times with using the start back. Steve George did it too using the Target trial. Also, no findings. Um, I I am I was really hopeful. I really was, guys, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. That it's going to be that easy that we can just identify these people and give them treatments. I do think that some people have come out and said that maybe the start back wasn't as good of a screener as we used to think it was. That's fair. And where I kind of lean is like, I just really think that we don't have very good treatments for these people that are high, even medium risk. And so, like, what happens is like they just still end up with chronic pain. Like, regardless that we throw all of these kind of CBT or psychologically informed PT or whatever you want to throw at them that you think is intensive, it doesn't seem like we can really stop their trajectory that much. And that's really like, it's really hard to grasp with that as a clinician. It really sucks for patients. And for research, it's just giving you a lot of no findings. And so, like, that is kind of my thought process on that right now.
The next area we can dive into, because you've essentially zoomed and moved further and further away from day-to-day clinical practice, because that was your initial intent to be a clinician and a chiropractor, and now you're essentially dealing with like the most meta of things, like with Medicare. What can the day-to-day clinician take away from some of your overall thoughts and experiences? Like, what recommendations do you have for them? I know you briefly mentioned to me this idea of like clinicians should probably read less research and not more. Maybe we start there, but any other thoughts you have from as you zoom out and look at kind of this 1,000-foot view?
Yeah. So that idea came from. So I was one of the mentors. I did the mentorship for Level Up or CalU or whatever it's called now, CalU. When I was Level Up, I did the mentorship, and Melanie Hudson was actually my mentor there, which is funny because we're friends now, and her and Megamato live here in Boston. And so I did that, and I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to like give back or whatever. So I signed up. I don't know, a year and a half ago, and I was like one of the mentors, and I had a really good group, and I continue to have this thought, and I think the same thing goes for the people that listen to like E3, and when you get here, you've read blog posts from Adam Meekins and Greg Lehman, and you've been following Sam and Mark for years and all this stuff. You've done a lot of the work. You know more than you think you know. Research in MSK has not given us answers in a really, really long time. If you look at what Sam and Mark and Greg have been saying about, you know, people kind of get better, you can do a lot of different exercises. Sometimes it hurts, and, that sucks, and we're sorry, and we reassurance and all of this stuff, but you can do so much in terms of like that non-specific pain or whatever, and try to like build them back up to feeling comfortable doing that. People have been saying that since the 80s. We have just had bouts of where people thought they could find a panacea, whether it was, bird dogs, or if it was some sort of manual therapy or anything. We've just kind of had those bouts for so long. And what I found is that like these student, and I felt for this as well, these student clinicians they would read so much that they wouldn't know what to do anymore. And they would read every new study that came out, and it was like this like paralysis by analysis ordeal. And the worst part about it is that like most research isn't meant for clinicians. Most research is published because we have a way of doing things now that like publish or perish. Basically, you have to publish in order to continue getting grants and keeping your job. So sometimes research is just published because you need to publish, and not because you have this novel finding. And B, because of that exact same incentive, a lot of research is actually kind of bad. So like if anything, you're just reading bad information, right? And so um, when you've gotten, I do think that people need to read research, especially at the beginning. But when you've gotten to this point where you've listened to your 100th E3 podcast or whatever, like you probably don't need to read a research paper every day or even every week. You know enough that, like, I promise you, the next thing that comes out is going to be published in the Lancet or in JAMA or something like that that really transforms your care. Somebody will mention it to you, and then you can go and read it. But don't do this thing where like you feel like it's like a quantity thing of like you need to read X amount of research every week in order to keep up to date. I mean, I can name papers from the 80s that you're like, oh crap, like this is everything. Like nothing has changed in 40 years, and it's like, yeah, it sucks, and that is probably true for most other health professions as well. It's very rare that you get a novel COVID and then you grab a vaccine. It's like very rare that that happens. Or like maybe we're gonna finally have a treatment for Alzheimer's. But like everybody knows about it, right? When something like that happens, and that everybody will tell you about it once something like that happens for MSK. It has not happened yet. And so I'm not saying that you don't need to read any research. I think that once you've hit a certain time, a certain level of knowledge, which I think most people that are in this like inner circle of CalU, E3 rehab, and all of that have hit that certain level of knowledge, you can tone it down a little bit because you're just confusing yourself, especially if you're a student that isn't doing clinical work on a day-to-day basis, because like you're just like playing around with it in your head now, and you're just self-doubting yourself, and you know more than you think, and you're adding too much, I guess, information into it. And I don't think a lot of it is helpful, especially because a lot of our trials are just like 30 people, and it's just not giving you anything.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of points to take away from that. I think that was a very powerful piece to talk about. And like obviously E3 rehab, one of the central tenets is evidence, but I think we easily get drawn into the idea that yeah, it's a quantity thing. And unfortunately, like a lot of the quality of the research is not fantastic. I do read a ton of research each week, and overwhelmingly, it's not that great. I'd say like the last year, I've actually spent a lot more time reading research from the 70s into the early 90s, and just so impressed at the quality of the research that was done then when it's compared to now. And I think there's just like a lot more challenge with the rigor to get it published, the timeline expectations, and the training for the researchers was a lot heavier. Either way, though, like I think you brought it up, you could take something like running. I made this video on running related injuries and how to use some general guidelines on managing it. And if you talk to someone who's been an experienced running coach, probably half the things that I said in there, while I provided research studies to justify them, they would have said a lot of similar things. Like, step one, reduce your mileage. Nothing mind blowing there. Two, run slower. Not this crazy concept. And then, like, okay, it hurts your ankle when you're running. Well, maybe we shift over to a different style that reduces ankle load. Like, they would have probably given a lot of similar recommendations without necessarily using research. And, like, do you need to go and read research to then provide those recommendations? No. But yeah, I see it can be really challenging. And like you said, I hear it all the time where there's so many young clinicians who are just in that position where they feel like they don't know what to do, but they have so much information and they know so much, but they just are struggling in how to apply it. And it can be very difficult.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and that kind of reminds me of a very similar topic there of so we've gotten to a point right now with the big research people, so like shoulder, Chris Littlewood, back pain, Chris Marr, and all this stuff. They are starting to lean away from exercise as a treatment for all, and I think that's really scaring the students and the clinicians. And so I want to put out there that like exactly like you said, sometimes you don't need an RCT to give treatment. And I say that as a researcher, and as somebody that not only wanted to be a clinician, but somebody that hangs around with clinicians. Like I talked to Aaron Kubal, one of my best friends, and I talk to him all the time. And I do that on purpose because I want to keep relevant to my research, to still be relevant to clinicians. But also, so my ideas on kind of exercise is like, I don't think that it's the panacea that we thought 15 years ago, regardless of how you view exercise. It's just not. For anything, we've gotten a lot of mill trials now. I mean, for OA, for knee OA, for shoulder, all of this stuff, and it is what it is. That does not mean that we have anything kind of better to give, and this is kind of like that Adam Meakin stuff process. There's a lot of null trials for basically every single treatment that you can think of. And the thing is, especially if you're treating a physically active population, which I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast are, that also means that you don't need to take that physical activity away from them. And then you could help them with like what you're talking about in terms of like what you're saying is really just biomechanics, right? Like your knee hurts, let's run a certain way that puts less load on your knee. Hopefully it'll hurt less. And if it doesn't, we try another issue. We bring down the mileage. We try to do things. Maybe that was what it is. Maybe it was just time or whatever. That's still allowing people to do what they want. And so the only thing that I think we're learning from a lot of these no trials now is that like it doesn't have to be exercise. So if somebody comes into you and like they don't like to exercise at all, you don't need to push them to exercise. You need to figure out as a clinician, your job is to figure out in what way you can help them. Sometimes that really is just letting them know that like it's going to probably feel better. They don't have cancer, nothing is broken, nothing like that. Sometimes that alone is helpful, and that is treatment. And I think that I think insurance companies have a little bit of fault at this because they don't pay for that. And so like clinicians don't view that as treatment, but it is treatment. It is treatment not only in MSK, it's treatment also in primary care. If you're scared, you're sick, you're like, oh crap, what do I have? And it's really just a cold. We shouldn't just give you antibiotics because we know we shouldn't if it's a viral cold or whatever, but it's still really important to reassure you, make sure that you are not go through your clinical reasoning process, make sure that you don't have anything really dangerous. And just that alone, it is treatment. And I think that is still true for PT and MSK. And the truth of the matter is that like exercise isn't the end all be all, but it could be something that you do use for somebody that does care about doing stuff like that, or wants to care about doing stuff like that, that are active. And so that's kind of my take on it is I think people are getting really scared of a lot of these exercise null trials. And I don't think that it needs to change their practice a whole lot.
What should clinicians know or be aware of from your experience or research going into more of the social determinants of health? Is there something that you feel like we're just blindly not looking into, or that just the day-to-day clinician maybe doesn't consider as much?
Yeah, so social determinants really is my main area of interest. I just like focused it on Medicare, but I think the reality is that people know this and they either ignore it or they don't think they can do anything about it, which is maybe slightly true. But I think it's still important to acknowledge is that like poverty really, really sucks, and hunger really, really sucks, and and it happens to a lot more people than we all want to admit to, and there are a lot more people struggling in a lot of our countries than we want to admit to, and so the poverty, hunger, and all of these different things, they are going to make not only your treatments less effective, but they're going to make that natural history basically go away for a lot of people. So what we're seeing basically is the poorer you are, the more food insecurity you have, housing insecurity. That is really what's driving a lot of this chronic pain issue. Is that like when you look at who has chronic pain, it is overwhelmingly poor people, people of color, different things like that. And that is an issue that I don't think that any one person can solve unless one of you wants to become a politician. But I think it's something that you need to be aware of. It's not any different than that you need to be aware of depression, mental health, and anything like that. And I have this dilemma with people that are really, really pushing for everybody and PT to like go against health insurance, and just go strictly cash pay. And I don't have any problem with cash pay. I helped Aaron build like his like his initial model of how he was going to charge for his cash pay. Now it's changed a lot since then, but um, so I have no problem with cash pay. But if you're saying that every PT needs to let go of health insurance, you're saying that people that can't afford to pay you $150 for a session don't deserve, if you think of PT as something that people deserve, don't deserve your help. And that is really, really hard. Again, I think that you can still, I understand the issues also with insurance of like it's really hard to make as much money with the current insurance model as you would like to or you deserve to as a doctoral trained person. But there's a trade-off here, and you can choose that trade-off is okay for you and for yourself. And I completely some of the people that I most admire in this profession are cash pay people, and that's okay. But if you're telling a lot of this to the students, and as the profession says, the only way for you guys to make enough money to balance the student loans is to go to cash pay. We need to all sit down and think about what that means, because we are making half of the population at least uh, not be able to afford us. And I think the thing that most resonates with me is that looking outside of MSK, last year there was a paper that showed that people that had cancer, terminal cancer or cancer that was really high stage, would still not get their treatments that would help them with cancer, where we know like some of these treatments are really going to work, right? We are pretty sure of some of these treatments for a certain amount of cancers, but they're really expensive. So health insurance companies sometimes make people pay out of pocket or co-insurance or copay. Either way, these people were literally just choosing to not get that, quote unquote choosing, because they couldn't afford it. And so thinking about that in cancer, like even things that are literally killing you and people are still like, I can't afford this, and I can't do this. Um, Imagine for that for PT, right? Because it's back, at the end of the day, it's not cancer, it's back pain, and it could really, really suck, and it could really take somebody out of the workforce. But if people won't pay for something, or can't pay for something that really literally is killing them, they are also unlikely to not be able to afford that PT. And we've seen this with copays, with like even $20 can make somebody not get that care. And if you really believe in your care, you think that people that have that issue, that back pain, that knee pain, you could help them. And so I'm not trying to steer everybody away from cash pay. I do think that there's a time and a place for that. And if you feel like that is necessary for you as an individual, that's okay. And like, I don't think that you should feel bad about some of that stuff. But if your whole idea is like everybody that's a PT should be cash pay, I think you really need to like think about what that means for the broader population.
The one of the last topics or talking points from your perspective, your views on going back to school for as a clinician or as a clinician doing research part-time. What is your experience? What are your overall kind of recommendations?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that clinicians can do, and I get a lot of this question sometimes when Aaron will share something that I posted, and then I can immediately get 100 followers and like 10 DMs or whatever of people that are like, okay, I'm a clinician, but maybe I don't want to do that full time, or maybe I don't want to do that forever. There are a lot of pros to doing research. One of them being that, like, honestly, everybody works from home now. And so if that's something that interests you, there's that. There's a lot that you can give without having that statistical knowledge just as a clinical expert. I can't express to you enough how many people get a PhD and like work on whatever disease or condition, and like they're not clinicians. They need clinical partners to help them make sure that their research is clinically relevant, A, and B, that they're not making some intervention that's just not realistic in a clinical setting. And so because of that, there's a lot of need for your help, not just as being a full-time researcher, but like just being on projects. And the good thing about that is that if you get on projects like that at your local university or anything like that, or you just happen to meet other researchers, you can get added onto grants. And that means that you can get paid for your time and your expertise. And so there's money there. But outside from just strictly being like kind of almost like a consultant, a lot of people are like, should I go back and get my MPH? And or should I go back and get my PhD? And I always tell them it kind of depends on what you want, right? And so um, an MPH degree really is for you to be a public health practitioner. And so you're not trained to lead your own research projects. And so with your MPH degree, if you want to work in public health, that is a really good degree because you can get a public health job. And now there is a loan repayment program strictly for MPHs because we don't have enough people getting MPHs. That if you go back and get your MPH and you work for any type of government, whether it's local, state, or national, or whatever, federal, uh, for 3 years, they pay your student loans off. So I know that a lot of PTs worry about the student loans. That is an option out there that you go back, you get your MPH degree. They're kind of, I mean, I don't, Chris, you know this, like at UT, it's cheap. I mean, the PT degree is cheap, but like my UT MPH is also very cheap, in state, of course. Um, and so, like a couple of grand, and you have an MPH degree after a year and a half or 2 years, and if you want to completely change jobs, that option is there, and they pay your student loans off, and you can be a PT on the side, go back and do PT, all of those, that option's always there. And I do think that you can learn a lot from looking at it from a public health standpoint, but also you can bring a lot to public health by coming from that clinical aspect as well. And then for the PhD, that is really for people that want to lead their own research. So if you don't want to lead your own research or come up with your own research ideas, I don't think that you need to go through the horrors of what a PhD is. The thing about a PhD is like some of them you can do it part time while still being a clinician. It will just take you a lot longer. Research takes a lot of time. Like this community based exercise project, we had that idea in 2021. We submitted the protocol last summer, and it still isn't published yet. And so, like, stuff just takes really, really long. A lot of people do a lot of different research, so they have their hands in a lot of things, and stuff kind of gets pretty slow for a couple of months. Peer review is slow. Um, if I'm going to tell you, it's super gratifying when you get work that can really, really change something. You get to literally, I'm not joking. I get paid to think. Like I just sit here and I think, and I'll be reading something, and I think, and that's work. Like that is literally work, and that was something that is crazy to me because like I used to do this on the side during Cairo school, and nobody was paying me, but now I'm paid, and it was a hard transition for me because I was like, this just seems like reading, and they're like, no, reading and thinking and talking and going on meetings is work now. And so if that's something that interests you, I really like, I had like, talking to me or talking to somebody else that's done it or doing or has done a PhD, because it really is getting paid to think. There are also horrors of academia that we can also discuss. It's not all good, but if you like this idea of just like really thinking through problems and thinking of solutions of how you could, try to attempt this stuff, like I do recommend the PhD. And I do think that it helps a lot with your clinical background, assuming that you want to stay involved in MSK research.
What are some of the horrors?
Of academia, there's no jobs. Oh, there's no academic jobs. So with the tenure system, which I am pro the tenure system because I do think it allows you to do stuff that maybe you wouldn't do research because it's not fundable or whatever. Um, but it's just really, really hard. And so that is the reason I chose Brown and didn't stay at UT, is because regardless of what they want to tell you, um, Ivy League schools, having that on your resume still matters a lot. And when there's only 10 job offers a year for, open tenure track positions, it really matters where you went to school. And so it is what it is. It really does still matter for academia. I don't think it matters for other things, but for academia it does. And so that's one of the reasons that I chose to go to Brown. Another one is like these big schools really do have a lot of money and endowments that they can give you so much more opportunity to do things. And so because of that, you can learn a lot more, network a lot better, go to all these conferences, shake a lot of hands, and hopefully that one of those handshakes will lead to academic jobs. But you can do a PhD and not get an academic job. Zach Rethorn was the PhD student under Chad Cook. He had a couple of social determinants publications with Chad. He's now a user experience researcher. I don't remember if Amazon or who it is. I have no idea what he makes a year, whatever. But UX research right now is like the hot thing, and basically you're just helping people have like better experience with apps or internet sites or whatever. And some of it is like I'm pretty sure he does like health tech sort of ordeal. So it's like you're helping a lot of people if you really increase that user experience. These jobs are going for like $200,000 a year, and if that's something that really matters to you, or if you need the help, some people come from really poor places and have taken out a lot of money, and you're like, I'm not making enough with this doctoral degree. That's there. It is, it's there, and it's a way for you to make a lot of money, and you could still do clinical care on the side if that's something that you really want to do. But there are a lot of options that you can do, and it doesn't necessarily have to stay within that whole MSK stuff, but it can if you wanted to.
Any other thoughts or recommendations or things you feel like we didn't touch on that you think would be valuable for this specific audience?
No, I mean, I'm glad we talked about the exercise stuff, because I think that's what's going to be, especially for the people that really follow the evidence, and try to really follow the evidence and keep up to date and all that stuff. I think these last trials that just came out last week just came out for heel pain. The Fix Heel trial came out that exercise wasn't better than giving advice and a heel cup to people for heel pain. And so I think we've seen that for like shoulder last year on a Chris Littlewood paper, and we've been seeing it for exercise for chronic low back pain for a long time. And I want people to acknowledge that, but also not freak out and think that, oh my God, exercise isn't. And I think anybody that's realistic with themselves can say that exercise was not going to be a panacea for chronic back pain or chronic pain in general. But that doesn't mean that it can't be something that you really help somebody in front of you. Because at the end of the day, what they really want to do is they want to decrease their pain a little bit, and they want to get back to the things that they love. And some of that is movement based, and exercise is real good at that stuff. And so, yeah, I don't want you guys to completely throw it away, but also acknowledge that, like, be prepared that hopefully one day we will have something that is really, really effective in our lifetime that we can really help people, and to be okay with that maybe not being non-pharmacological. Maybe not. Who knows? I did want to ask anybody that listens to this if you are at all interested in private equity and how it is impacting physical therapy. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I just published a paper in BMJ that we synthesized all of the evidence for private equity companies acquiring healthcare research institutions. So hospitals, nursing homes, all of that stuff. Big problem in Canada, Sam, with nursing homes. They're all owned by private equity companies. Basically, these companies come in, buy out these healthcare institutions. Their goal is to make their investors 15% within 10 years, which is a lot higher than the stock market, which means that they, do things in order to make a lot of money. And that sometimes really goes to not only hurt patients, but it also hurts clinicians. And I think that's going a lot in physical therapy, and nobody's studied it. And I've tried to study it. I've reached out to a lot of, American physical therapy researchers, and they all say the same thing. Really, really interesting topic, super important, can't help, sorry. And I think a lot of that is because, they are involved with private equity owned physical therapy stuff, and that's okay, that's fine. But I'm here and I want to hear your thoughts. I've heard horror stories, but if you have good thoughts, I also want to hear that, and hopefully come up with some sort of research idea to see how that's impacting physical therapy.
You mentioned before we started recording that you have some funny Aaron Kubal stories. Should we end on uh, an experience you've had with Aaron, wrapping it up?
Yeah, so two funny stories real quick on Aaron. So the first time Aaron was like all of you, lost in school. He was just happened to be lost in school 6 months or so after I was lost in school. And so he reached. I was, like I said, angry on the internet at one point, and so he reached out to me on Facebook, like, "Oh, I've seen your comments. Like, I totally agree. Like, but I have no idea what you're talking about." And I still have those Facebook messengers of like very initial 4 or 5 years ago, Aaron Kubal, like, so what is SMT, and like, does it do anything? Does it actually do anything? Whatever. And now, obviously, he's like no cracky backy guy. But just like I have to pull those up one day and screenshot them. Just like also Aaron at one point was lost in the sauce as well, and look at him now. But then the first time we ever met in person, he came to Orlando because Jake Harden is in Orlando, and I was living there at the time. And Jake was doing a course at his clinic, and so Aaron flew in, and we went to meet Jake the night before the course for dinner with his wife and all of that. And Aaron and I went to roll the beer before, and this man had one Guinness. And he looks at me like so nervous to meet Jake, which is hilarious now because they're like partners on everything. So nervous to meet Jake while we're on the drive there. And he's like, dude, I think I'm too drunk to meet Jake right now. And I was like, buddy, we've had one Guinness. So don't let him fool you with all his like wine drinking while he's on his videos or whatever. That man, one beer, that's all it takes. And yeah, those are my Aaron Kubal stories.
That's great. So for people that do want to reach out to you, whether it's about private equity or in general, how can people talk to you?
Yeah, so I would say Twitter is social media wise where I'm most active. And so my Twitter, you can put it on the show notes, but it's at GERO5. And then my email address is my full name, which I won't say, but you just put in the show notes, at brown.edu. Yeah, reach out to me. And also reach out to me if you like are like stuck on a research, like, what does this mean? Happy to help. I promise you, you're probably overthinking it. But I'm happy to help. Reach out to me if you're thinking about leaving school or changing career paths, because I did it. And feel free to reach out to me if you're like, I have a research idea. I don't know how to go about this. And I will tell you, I will help you think through it. And because that's what Josh Sadler did to me. And I'm, welcome to help regardless. So, yeah.
Sam, any other final thoughts or questions before we wrap it up?
I think this was a fantastic episode, a lot of really good insights, and I would love to have you back on in the future to discuss how we can have a more meaningful impact from a public health perspective and getting involved in the community and what sort of interventions could be done, things to start brainstorming, because I don't think, like you said, it doesn't ever get discussed.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And yeah, no, it's one of the things that I'm most passionate about because I want you guys to feel like experts because you are. And I say that to like all physical therapists, chiros, or whatever, even strength coaches, personal trainers. You are an expert on something, and your impact does not necessarily have to be one on one on the clinic. So yeah,
Awesome. Thanks again, Geronimo.
yep.